In an exclusive interview with CNBC, French Finance Minister Christine Lagarde says that France is prepared to take additional austerity measures to ensure it meets its deficit targets. Stefan spoke to Christine Lagarde. He's live for us in Madrid now, following the Spanish banking story. But on the subject of the French attitudes to austerity and also to e-bonds, Stefan, really interesting that Lagarde seems to be saying no, we don't want European bond issuance right now. But she doesn't seem to be saying never.
Exactly. It's not for now, but that could be a solution on the long term. But it's too early to put in place these Eurobonds that some peripheral states would like to create in Europe. That's the view of Christine Lagarde, but it's not a definitive no. You know that France has the same position as Germany on that particular point. Also, Christine Lagarde, regarding domestic issues, is very focused on the deficit reduction. That's the top priority, again, for the government this year. And if needed, the government would announce additional austerity measures to reach these targets. And I've asked also Christine Lagarde if she feels that France's AAA rating is under threat.
Well, first of all, I'll remind you that France has significantly reformed its pension system. And a couple of months ago, nobody thought that we would actually go to the end of the reform and resist street pressure, which was regarded as a French tradition. Well, not only did we resist street pressure, but we really conducted the reform exactly as the president wanted it, with an extension of the working life and with a better balance of the financing of the system. So that's a very, very positive sign, and it goes further than just the pension reform. I think it's a real indication of France's ability and determination to reform itself. You asked me about the AAA signature of France. Let me observe that quite a few rating agencies have very recently analyzed the French risk in close association with the German risks and a couple of others as well, and have indicated that the AAA rating was well deserved.
Do you think that the deficit targets in France are realistic? I mean, is it reachable without any additional austerity measure?
You know, in 2010, we initially scheduled 8.2 ratio to GDP deficit. We will most likely finish the year with 7.7. For 2011, we set a target of 6%. And the President has reaffirmed this commitment on many occasions. And I will, for myself, regard that as an absolute unconditional performance objective. And we have to deliver. There's no option to that. Which means that not only are we going to renew all the measures that we have taken for 2010, but if need be, we will take additional measures.
France will unveil this week its program for the G8 and G20 presidency. Why do you think it is so important to reform the monetary system?
The President will actually discuss in details France's program for the G20 and for the G8. And one of the topics, as indicated earlier, is the reform of the international monetary system. The President has been very clear about it. We're not going to complete the exercise within 1 year, but we clearly need to, number one, better coordinate between the currencies. We need to organize the internal, how would I put it? The world is becoming much more global, much more multilateral, much more not single in its operating format, not dual, but multiple. You've got many players that are popping out, that are strong players, whose currencies have to be taken into account. So it's a process. It's clearly not an attempt to undermine the strength of the dollar, which is the reference reserve currency, but we have to take into account the movements that are taking place at the moment.
France's Finance Minister Christine Lagarde speaking to you, Stefan, then a little earlier on. You're in Madrid now, and we've had some news out of Spain with the Deputy Prime Minister saying the government plans to speed up the reform of the Cajas. There was quite a lot of news flow on this last week. What's the latest on this story?
We don't have the details yet, but it's likely to happen in the next coming days. The government is going probably to change the law in Spain that will authorize the government to buy a direct stakes in the Cajas, which are the local saving banks, and which are widely seen as the weakest part of the banking sector in Spain because of their exposure to the real estate and construction sector. So what is likely going to happen? The government is going to change the law, then the FROB, which is the restructuring fund for the Spanish banking sector, would inject some money and buy direct stakes in these banks. How much money would be needed? That's the question. There's a wide range of estimates, really wide, from 17 to 120 billion euros. The consensus is around 25 to 50 billion. It's a lot of money, 50 billion euros. It's approximately 5% of the Spanish GDP, and that could jeopardize the target of 6% for the Spanish public deficit this year. So it's really a tough choice for the government. It's rescue versus deficit. I've asked Christine Lagarde, who's now the president of the G20 Finance. I've asked her her view on the Spanish banking system and precisely on the Cajas situation.
The Spanish banks, like the French banks, like the German banks, like the Swedish banks, will be put to test and will be stress tested in due course. And just like for any other bank in the European Union, if capitalization or recapitalization is required, then we'll have to see to that.
And still about the Cajas, this morning, Cinco Días, which is a Spanish newspaper, is reporting that the Bank of Spain asked the Cajas to cut some jobs and to reduce the number of their branches in order to improve their financial situation. And that, of course, to be able later to convince investors to invest in the Cajas, because at this stage, plenty of them still have a lot of trouble to convince private investors to take part to the recapitalization. Steve, I send it back to you.
All right, Stefan, thanks very much indeed. Fascinating, isn't it, when Christine Lagarde says these banks will be put to the test in a stress test. I thought we did all that last year. Maybe they just weren't good enough. I'm sure you've all got a view on that.